And now, please welcome CEO and Managing Director of Air India, Campbell Wilson, in discussion with Skift Airlines editor Gordon Smith.
Campbell, a very warm welcome to the Skift India Forum.
Thank you. Good morning.
You don't need to be an aviation geek, don't worry, to know that Air India is in the middle of a 5-year, multi-billion-dollar transformation program. You call that Vihaan?
Mm-hmm.
Give us a little bit of a status update. Real time, how is the Campbell Wilson dashboard looking this morning?
Well, it's a 5-year transformation program. We're 3 years into it. The first year really was about triage and stabilizing an airline that was on the verge of collapse. Second year was about capability building so that we could try and reach the aspirations of growth and quality that we're still working towards. Third year very much was about growth. We inducted 100 aircraft over about 18 months. And about merger. We have completed the consolidation of 4 airlines in the Tata Group into one Air India group with one full service and one low-cost airline. Moving forward, it's about consistency, efficiency, profitability, and upgradation of the product, because we still have some 40-odd legacy wide-body aircraft that are in dire need of an interior refit, and that is work in progress.
A lot of themes that we will touch on later in our conversation there. We can see on the screen, I think that's your new flagship A350 product. Speaking at the Skift India Forum to my colleague Pin Bhutia last year, you said the first few months of Vihaan were, quote, cleaning up the accumulated sins of the past. My question to you, Campbell, have you been able to put the mop back in the broom cupboard? Is the cleanup job finished?
For the most part. I mean, we've restructured physical premises, 63 offices consolidated into one.
63.
Yes, we've completely replaced or significantly upgraded 140 IT systems. We've had about 4,000 staff leave us and about 9,000 staff come on board. With the consolidation process of the 4 airlines, we've taken the best practices of all of those 4 airlines and now put them into the entity that is operating today. So most of the cleanup has been done, but we are in aviation. As the phrase goes, shit still happens. And we deal with that and clean it up as it comes.
We'll take a step back briefly to look at the broader aviation system, ecosystem in India. We've got 2 major airports coming online in the next few months, Noida serving the Delhi NCR region and Navi down in Mumbai. Give us a little bit of color as to when we can expect Air India and Air India Express to be serving these locations.
Well, both of those airports are open for commercial service sometime this year. Air India Express will be operating from both of those airports. For the moment, we see Air India Express as the most appropriate vehicle to operate rather than Air India. Air India is for the moment focused on building our hubs out at Delhi and Mumbai incumbent airports. But look, both of them, I think, are sorely needed, particularly Navi Mumbai, because the existing Mumbai airport is very capacity constrained. And so I think, it's a welcome development to see this airport infrastructure come along.
But I think reading between the lines, there will be a little while before we see Air India operating long-haul services from either of those airports.
Well, bear in mind that we're a full-service carrier that also is building a hub. And when you're building a hub, you want the network effect, which means you want most of your operations at a single airport.
Sure.
So you can get that cross-feed. Splitting the operation across 2 airports, even if they're reasonably proximate, is not efficient. I mean, London Heathrow, London Gatwick don't really operate synergistically. So for us, the presence at particularly Noida Airport is going to be to serve point-to-point markets from that catchment. Navi Mumbai, I think there's going to be some forced migration of capacity, given the need to redevelop one of the terminals at the existing Mumbai airport.
Sure.
So that's going to be a little bit of a hybrid solution, at least for the near term.
As we've already established earlier in our conversation, Air India is firmly in expansion mode, but there are whispers of sort of recessionary feel in the air, particularly in the United States, depending on who you're listening to. When you look at the economic volatility that we've seen in recent weeks, does it concern you?
Well, I think anything that impacts the global economy has a concern for us, but I think we're largely insulated from it for a few reasons. One, India itself is growing so fast organically. 2, we have a lot of catch-up to do with respect to market share of Indian carriers and Air India in particular. There's huge opportunity to deploy aircraft from India to markets that Indians want to travel to. So I think our problem is actually more one of supply rather than one of demand. And so even if there is a global slowdown, actually we still have a lot of upside opportunity.
And looking beyond Wall Street for a moment, are you seeing any softness in bookings inbound to the United States based on recent policy changes or potentially pending policy changes coming out of Washington?
Not at this juncture.
Something you're cognizant of, though, no doubt.
Yeah, but also we've deployed brand new aircraft into New York, our 350, which you saw on screen there. So actually we're attracting market share, we're attracting a high yielding customer than Air India could probably hope to command in the past. So to the extent that the market might be shifting, actually Air India is perhaps swimming against the tide a little bit, or with the tide.
But you acknowledge the market might be shifting?
No, I think we haven't seen anything yet. I think you're putting words into my mouth.
Well, I'm just trying to get the best from you.
But I think, look, to the extent there is greater uncertainty about policy, about direction of economy, people are going to be reticent about making investment decisions or holding back on certain decisions. And that's not good for economic growth, at least in the near term.
Now, just to the audience, this might feel like a conversation between Campbell and I. It's not just between us. We'd love to get any questions from you. Go onto the Skift event app, the Slido function there, submit any questions, and if we do have any time towards the end of the session, we'll try and incorporate those into our discussion. Since you joined us last year, Campbell, one of the greatest achievements, arguably one of your greatest achievements, has been the integration of Vistara Airlines into Air India. How long will it be before the Vistara brand disappears completely?
Well, let me just categorically say it's the team's achievement. I think the teams from all four airlines, as well as the regulators and suppliers, did a fantastic job. But merging airlines is not easy because you've got to really, literally change the engines while the aircraft is flying. So most international mergers of airlines take between 6 and 8 years. We did it in 2.5. In fact, we did 2 concurrent ones in a year and a half at the same time as we were transforming the airlines that were being merged.
Sure.
For the most part, it's complete. People fitment, aircraft, systems, policies, customer infrastructure, loyalty program, all completely merged. And so that is done. What is not yet done is painting of aircraft and refabricating the interior.
Those consumer touch points.
Yeah, and that will happen over the course of the next year and a half. Bear in mind, we've also got the legacy Air India fleet to refit the interiors of and repaint. So we've got best part of 100 aircraft to go through hangars, and it's a matter of taking aircraft out of service, putting them into a hangar, repainting. And so it's going to take some time before we complete this process, but the fact is the airlines are now operating as a single Air India. And I think the proof is in the pudding. From an on-time performance perspective, the last couple of months have been above 80%, about 83%. Vistara was operating at 73. Okay. Domestic NPS, Vistara was 42. The new Air India is 43. So the evidence is that the new Air India is as good, if not better, than the old Vistara. Now, is it as consistent? Not yet, because we've still got aircraft to upgrade. Yes. But by the middle of this year, all of the narrow-body aircraft, bar a handful, will be refitted to a consistent modern standard. And we're embarking already on the process of refitting the wide-body aircraft so that by a couple of years' time, all 40 of the legacy wide-body aircraft will be as good as anyone's.
We'll get onto the refits in a bit more detail in a minute, but I think most people in the audience would agree that one of Vistara's strongest cards was sort of pushing the boundaries, raising the standards of what an Indian carrier should look like. But Air India itself is playing catch-up in a big way. We've seen a lot of chatter around premium demand, how that's sustained right through the end of the pandemic period into what many are calling the new normal. Are you concerned that this elevated level of premium demand will eventually start to slip off?
I think there's 2 dimensions to looking at this. One is the broader global market, and I wouldn't hazard a guess. Certainly, there had to be some moderation from the post-COVID boom.
Sure.
And I think we've seen that. And I think if you look at the financial results of airlines and their prognosis of how the yields are trending, most of the global players are saying there's been a slight moderation. But Air India is coming from a very low base, and the product upgradation, process and system upgradation, service upgradation is all meaning that we're attracting a clientele that perhaps previously didn't consider Air India. Not to mention the fact that we're now serving a lot more destinations non-stop from India with a product that is competitive. So actually we're seeing a continual improvement in our yields and premium traffic, which is why new aircraft that come in will have a slightly larger premium segment, capacity in the aircraft, whether it's business class, premium economy, and in due course first. So we think that as the Indian market evolves, there is going to be increasing demand for premium travel. But at the same time, it's a market where there's a lot of people who are starting to travel for the first time by air. And so there's always going to be that entry level. So with Air India and Air India Express, we're catering to the full gamut of the Indian traveller demand.
Just on the topic of Air India Express, your two-airline strategy, as you've briefly already outlined, bringing those 4 Tata-owned carriers down to just 2, Air India and Air India Express. Correct me if I'm wrong, Campbell, but the latter will not have a formal business class product. Is that right, on Air India Express?
Correct. So some of the aircraft they've bought in that were built for other airlines and we've acquired and taken to accelerate growth, they have a business class, but we'll be refitting them into a single class configuration over the course of this year.
And how concerned are you that on a connecting itinerary, I could step off your flagship A350 from New York, transferring onto a domestic flight and being put onto a single configuration A320 for another 3 hours? There's going to be a bit of a disconnect there between what you're getting on Air India mainline versus what you're getting on Air India Express.
So for the metro markets in India, as well as the ones that have a significant volume of international connecting traveller, that will be Air India, a multi-class full-service proposition.
Having that consistency.
Yes.
Yeah.
For other routes which are thinner, perhaps not so much business traffic, yes, it will be Air India Express. But bear in mind, we're talking about a 2.5 hour flying duration. And if you look at any survey of customer expectation, they generally say that a full service and low cost experience for a flight of less than 2 hours is much of a muchness. And you see the same thing with Qantas Jetstar, you see the same thing with Singapore Airlines and Scoot. You know, there is an acceptance that for a short flight, a low cost seat with meal provided, with checked baggage provided, with perhaps streaming entertainment is just as good as a full service proposition.
But there may well be the case that you need to educate the customer on exactly what they're getting, managing expectations.
Exactly. No one should be surprised.
Yes.
We should be very clear in our communications, but I think the value proposition should be sufficient.
And getting into the weeds in terms of baggage allowance, will there be any disconnect between what you would get as a Air India Express customer versus Air India on a joint itinerary?
Well, it is getting into the weeds, but if someone is connecting long haul, there are concessions you can make with respect to some of the meals, the baggage, the allowance, perhaps even the terms and conditions, refundability, changeability, to make it a more consistent end-to-end experience.
Sticking with premium, one of our Skift megatrends for 2025, and I would encourage anyone who hasn't seen the Skift megatrends for this year, they are exceptional. Don't go onto your phones right now, but maybe during the chai break, have a look there. One of the Skift megatrends was the rise, the renaissance of first-class air travel. I don't think it's a secret that Air India has a new first-class product in the works. Can you give us an updated timeline on when we can expect that?
Well, there are 2 parts to our first-class plan. I mean, I think, let's be fair, first class actually is a less profitable product than business class. I think most airlines have done this study and come to the same conclusion. Notwithstanding, it's a flagship product. It's an aspirational one. So we obviously are going to be positioning ourselves as a tier 1 airline, and so we've decided that we will have a first class product. In the short term, you sort of have to take what's available, because first class seats are very complex, very expensive to produce, and from start to finish, it's about a 7-year process. So we've started the process of those 7 years for some later delivery aircraft.
Okay.
But in the interim, we have to take and then customize what is sort of off the shelf. I won't go into too much detail other than to say that we do see a place for first class, both from a positioning as well as some of the routes. And it's work in progress.
Work in progress. Let me just push you on that a little bit further if I can. I was speaking to Patrick Healy, the chairman of Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong in October. The word he used to describe Cathay's new first-class product was mind-blowing. Would you apply a similar superlative to what's coming at Air India?
Well, it's still very early days, and I would say that it will be as good as anyone's, if not better.
There we go. A new first-class seat is only as good as the planes that it's flying on. You've famously got hundreds of aircraft on order with Airbus and Boeing. I'm not going to insult your intelligence, Campbell, by asking you if you have supply chain issues. I know there are headaches across the board, across the industry. My question to you is this: what are the specific pinch points that you're seeing this week, this month?
Yeah. Well, you're right. We had ordered 570 new aircraft, originally 470. We topped up by another 100 in December last year. Fair to say that there are pinch points everywhere. On some aircraft, particularly the narrow bodies, there's a real pinch point with engines. And if you talk to Airbus, they're making aircraft that don't have engines available, so they're having to be parked. There's pinch points with respect to the supply of seats, particularly first and business class seats, and indeed that is impacting us as well as our retrofit program for older aircraft.
Sure.
There's challenges with respect to components as well as some elements of fuselage. Both Boeing and Airbus have challenges in their production line of certain aircraft because they can't get components or parts of the fuselage from suppliers. So the reality is that this is going to remain a supply-constrained market for, and I'm not talking about Air India or India, I'm talking about global aviation. It's going to remain a supply-constrained market for another 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years. Let's try and find a positive if we can in a very challenging environment. Is there any part of the supply chain or the delivery process more broadly that's improved over the past year? Is there anything that you say, well, that was a real headache in early 2024, but actually we're doing all right now?
Look, I think it has all improved.
Okay. Yeah.
It is just not where we want it to be.
That's fair enough. Let's just take a look at some of the aircraft you've got on order in a bit more detail, because I know there's people in the audience that are keen to know this. The A350-1000, you already operate the 900. What's the latest timeline on the first delivery of the 1000?
2026.
2026. Any within 2026, first quarter, towards the end?
Originally it was early, now it's probably middle.
Got it. The 7879, we've already got some you inherited from Vistara. What about the new delivery?
2025.
2025? Towards the end of the year?
Already nearly halfway through. So
come on.
second part.
Second part. And finally, the 777X.
Who knows?
Who knows? I can't pin you down any further on that. That's fantastic. Lots of discussion around the new planes, and that's what grabs the headlines. But you mentioned retrofitting. It's a very important part of the broader transformation at Air India. What are your priorities currently around retrofitting?
It is the number one priority. It's the biggest pain point we have. It's the biggest contributor to an inconsistent customer experience. The 777s were supposed to start their refit last year. We got let down by seat suppliers, so I had to go back to the drawing board. So we're now putting these aircraft through what we call a heavy refresh program, where we change basically everything except for the seats and in-flight entertainment. First aircraft is presently in Singapore, comes back in a few days. We'll put the rest of the 777 fleet through the program. So by October this year, the full fleet would have been refreshed. Then the retrofit of seats and in-flight entertainments will commence next year. The 787 program, first aircraft flies off to Victorville in California next month.
Yeah, 7878?
78, yep. For a complete refit of interior seats, in-flight entertainment systems, the lot. It'll take a few months for that refit to happen and then be certified. The aircraft will be back in India flying probably September. And then we'll put 3 aircraft a month through the program. So by early mid-2027, all of the legacy wide-body aircraft will have been upgraded. It's still slower than we would have liked, but that's just the reality of supply chain constraints, the number of aircraft we can take out of service at any particular point in time, and of course the capacity of engineering companies and the like to be able to do the work.
Interesting, Campbell, you mentioned 2027. That brings me on very neatly to my next question. It's regarding outbound traffic from India. I think there's a table that we can bring up on the screen here. 2027 looks like India could be the 5th largest market globally in terms of outbound travel. Do you acknowledge that there's a very real risk that a lot of that capacity growth will go to foreign overseas carriers?
Well, I think the reality is that it's up to the Indian carriers to procure and deploy more capacity. That has been the fundamental constraint of Indian aviation over the years. Now you see India with an order book of more than 1,000 aircraft. Yeah. You see both of the major carriers here looking at wide-body international operation. And I think that's a good thing because it's bringing the locus of Indian travel back onto Indian soil and all of the spin-off economic benefits that brings to tourism, to airports, caterers, hoteliers, everything else. So I think the power is in our hands. It's just the ability, particularly given the supply chain constraints of aircraft, means that the pace will be determined by external partners rather than our own desires and capabilities. But I think that as time goes on, more and more of Indian aviation critical mass will be in India.
Let's pivot to inbound travel. Full disclosure, I traveled here from Portugal via the Middle East. It was frankly cheaper, the schedules worked better for my particular itinerary. What can Air India do, and arguably the broader ecosystem in India, do to attract more inbound traffic on the country, arriving into India on Indian metal?
Well, first things first, we need to connect the cities that people want to fly to. It is a fact that at the point of Air India's privatization, Air India was really the only wide-body operating airline in the country, and it only operated 42 wide-body aircraft, compared to 150 in Singapore, 250 in Dubai. So just the mere addition of capacity and connecting cities that people want to fly to and from is going to have a significant impact.
So build it and they will come sort of mentality.
The product quality and reputation. There needed to be upgradation for that. We're doing that, and that's why we're seeing a change in the profile of customer that's coming. There's the ease of doing business, the visa process, the customer facilitation through the airport, the transit experience. All of that needs work, but there's an awareness that that needs work, and it's not just the airline that needs to do it, it's the airport, the government authorities also need to play a part, and they are. There's an awareness. I still think that the best national advertising campaign for tourism, even ahead of 100% New Zealand, or pure New Zealand, was Incredible India.
Incredible India.
And I think we need to reboot that, not just with private sector money, but with government support as well. And then there's quality. The experience in India can be as good or better than anywhere, and I think this hotel is one example of excellence. But there's also elements of the tourist experience in India that is a bit hit and miss.
Sure.
And I think, particularly when we're wanting to attract foreign tourists, there needs to be some middle ground between their expectations and our delivery.
Exactly.
So I think ease, awareness, quality, and connectivity.
And that's where you're feeding back to peers in government and to broader stakeholders. Let's take a look at loyalty now, because there's a lot of buzz, even just speaking in the breakfast room, about the untapped potential of co-branded credit cards and loyalty, not just in Indian Airlines, but more broadly across the Indian travel sector. You recently revamped your Maharaja Loyalty Club. Correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to be integrating that with Air India Express. Have you got any sort of timeline around that integration?
Well, it's less about an integration and bringing the Air India Express network and travel into the Maharaja Club program, so you get recognised, you can accrue, and you can redeem with Air India Express as well. That's work in progress. It'll be probably sometime this year.
Sometime this year. And what's your ambition for the broader market penetration of the Maharaja Club? How big do you think it could get?
Well, it's well over 10 million people already, and it's growing by about 300,000 a month. So the opportunity is huge, bearing in mind that 12 months ago we had a proposition that was completely uncompetitive and not customer friendly. So I think the upside is huge. We don't yet have a co-brand credit card. We're in the midst of an RFP for one. And so I really think that, sort of like Qantas frequent flyer in Australia, Air India frequent flyer will be the second currency of India.
And just briefly on co-branded credit cards, we obviously have some colleagues from the US in the room. Co-branded credit cards are just the story of the day.
Yes.
They got a few of the larger airlines through COVID, arguably. Do you see more untapped potential to unlock in the Indian market with your co-branded credit card partners?
Absolutely, yes.
Let's take a question now from the audience. It's here. How do you think India's outbound travel is shaping? Do you expect the growth to continue? We saw the slide there with regard to India growing. And how is Air India tapping into that growing segment, particularly the short haul? We touched on that briefly, but any more color on just the importance of outbound travel?
Well, in India, outbound travel is growing at 8% a year compound. It doesn't take too many years to double, if that's the case. India's propensity to travel by air is 1/10 that of China. It's where China was 20 years ago. So if you can consider a doubling or tripling of Indian travel demand, it's going to grow significantly for time to come, which is why we've ordered 570 aircraft, and that won't be the last of our orders, I'm sure. So really, how are we tapping it? We're tapping it by buying aircraft, deploying aircraft, upgrading the proposition, merging airlines so we've got the critical mass to compete and hopefully surpass others.
Another point from the audience here, with legacy challenges, how do you plan to ensure that Air India's ambitious growth doesn't outpace its ability to deliver a high-quality experience? So growing pains, how are you going to combat those?
Look, it's not easy to both grow fast and transform and upgrade your product at the same time. In merging 4 airlines, we were able to merge the best of the processes and capabilities of those 4 airlines. We were able to fill a lot of the gaps, because bear in mind, we'd kept a lot of positions unfilled in Air India in anticipation of people coming from Vistara or AirAsia. Yeah. There's a lot of capability and skills that those people, as well as people that have come in from outside the airlines, have bought. And so now, finally, we're in this sort of steady state configuration where people are not nervous about what merger might bring, what position they're going to hold, which procedure do I follow. Now it's about stability with the right people, competent systems, and clarity of purpose to continue upgrading. So it's taken 3 years to get to this point. There's a lot of moving parts in that 3 years, but I'm quite confident that now we're on a good track.
Hey, Gordon, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah, a question from Rafa. Jump in, please.
Campbell, sorry, I have to do this, but Air India's magazine is called Namaste.AI. I always confuse it. It's like an AI thing, and Air India stands for AI, so I always think about that as well. What part of your operations will be the first to get totally automated outside of customer service? Because customer service is the easy part, lowest hanging fruit. Everybody's, so the front end is AI, chatbot, etc. Everybody's doing it. So that's a low bar. Other parts where you see ability to take out people and put in automation, raise your margins, what part do you think will be the first to go?
No, I don't really like the way you phrased that. I think we should be looking at AI as an augmentation and an enabler rather than a substitution. I think it's a complex business that's going to require, the aircraft can fly itself, for example. We still have pilots. So it's going to be an augmentation. I think back-end processes like refund, I think a lot of that can be, AI can be applied to it. I think a lot of training can be augmented with AI. The number of procedures a ground staff needs to remember, a cabin crew needs to remember, a pilot needs to remember. Gen AI can aggregate, synthesize, and present a very concise answer based on your tens of thousands of pages of SOP and policy. Operations control. You've got people dealing with many different variables and having to make a judgment call of what is the next best action. But many of those variables are repetitive. We've seen some version of that configuration before. And so AI can give you, based on what we have seen in the past, this is some of the options you might consider. And so it either improves the quality or speed of decision making. So I think that there's many applications, but I wouldn't want to say that we're completely substituting humans. I think that's probably not, it's not helpful, and it's also probably not likely.
Do you, sorry, a follow-up question on that from a safety perspective. And do you think this recent spate of crashes or incidents that have happened, particularly in the US, does that worry you that it inhibits the public from having confidence in flying? And what do you think the implications are, particularly for India, or do you see that as a totally different issue?
Well, I think any aviation incident is cause for the industry to reflect and learn. And I think the history shows that the industry is exceptionally good at doing that. And if you also look at the trend of aircraft incidents and accidents, notwithstanding this spate of events, actually, the trend continues to improve. So I think it's more of an industry issue that we understand what happened, why, what we can learn, what can change, as it is any particular country.
Okay. All right, thank you, Campbell.
Rafa, thank you for your additional points. And we'll have a lot more conversation about AI throughout the forum. So we'll plug in some deeper issues there. Campbell, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next year.
Thank you.
Thanks.